little bit last week we talked about standardized prayer. I want to continue that theme tonight. Last week we spoke about it with regard to the siddur as a whole and the construction of the siddur with regards to the morning brachos, which includes the karbanos, which are the offerings, the psukim de zimra, which are the psukim, the verses of praise to Hashem, Shema, including its brachos, and then of course the Amidah. So there you had four sections corresponding to the four worlds, the four levels of creation. Something I just want to just mention, I didn't mention this last time, but I think it's kind of obvious, is when we say Shema, we say Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Echad means, what does Echad mean? You can all answer the question. It means one. Echad means one. What kavana, what intention should a person have when one says Echad? So when I was young, I was taught God is one in the 7 levels of heaven and earth, 4 corners of the universe. According to what we said last week, you can say it even simpler, which is God is one in this world and in the 3 worlds above us, because 3 plus 1 equals 4. Because Dalid represents 4. Aleph is 1, Bet is 2, Gimel is 3, Dalid is 4. So when you say Echad, that God is one, He's one where? In the 4 worlds that we talked about last week. Okay, that's just as an aside. It occurred to me that I should have mentioned it last week. So that's a little bit of a review in terms of understanding that the Siddur as a whole is constructed in such a way so that a person climbs from one world to the next until finally you're standing in front of Hashem. And that, of course, is the Amidah. So why standardized prayer? Why did the sages see fit to standardize the text and the time frame of prayer? If prayer is a connection to God, how can you regulate that? How can you regulate a relationship? Wouldn't it be much more meaningful to keep prayer time spontaneous and its wording freestyle? So we've talked about this, and from different perspectives, we'll continue to talk about it tonight. If you think about other relationships in your life, for most of us on tonight, it's not for all of us, but for most of us, either is marriage or it was marriage in the past, perhaps. For some people, in our shul, we have some people like this as well. It's inevitable, but for some people, a birthday is a really big deal. An anniversary is a really big deal. And this is I'm just telling you this off the top of my head right now. My anniversary, I had to think what number anniversary. I think it's 17th. Can you believe that, Michal? I think it's my 17th anniversary is coming up in Mirz Hashem on February 4th. Yud Daled Shvat. The 14th of Shvat is my anniversary. And for Shandy and for me, an anniversary is Sunday night, Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night. It's not really a big deal. Not necessarily a big deal. Maybe it's an excuse to go out, which we'll do every other year. Get to go out together. But it's not necessarily such a big deal. But for some people, and you know who you are, a birthday is a really big deal. An anniversary is a really big deal. And it's really important to mark it. Now let's think about that for a second. What did we just say? We just said that we want to understand, like, if prayer is a connection to God, how can it be regulated? If a relationship is a connection to another person, how can it be regulated? Like, why should your anniversary be? I'm sure you all have an answer for me. I'm not interested in your answer right now, okay? I'm trying to bring out a point. The point is that on the one hand, you'll argue, how can prayer be regulated? It's my personal connection to God. I'll say, well, you regulate the rest of your relationships, don't you? Is that a strong argument? I don't know if it is or not. You'll think about it. Let me know what you think. Yeah, I'm just kind of coming up with that idea right now. We do regulate our relationships. Many people do. And for some people, it's date night. I have a friend who told me that, and I don't think this is an exaggeration, he goes out on a date every single Wednesday night with his wife. If his brother got married on Wednesday night, I don't think he'd show up because that's date night with his wife. Now, is that an exaggeration? A slight exaggeration, but that's really how he feels. He'll do everything he can to make sure his brother will not be scheduled to get married on a Wednesday night because date night is sacrosanct to him. And it's true. I've tried to get him to come to different things on Wednesday nights, and it never happens because for him, he regulates his relationship. We do. We regulate it. We do regulate our relationship with Hashem, and it's not such a crazy thing to say that we do. On the one hand, on the other hand, maybe it would be more meaningful to keep prayer time spontaneous, to keep the wording freestyle. And we talked about this again, as I mentioned last week, from a certain perspective. We're going to continue to speak about it tonight. Now, obviously, as I've told you in the past, Judaism does not look down upon spontaneous prayer. You can pour out your soul to God at any time. And of course, it's a beautiful thing. But the Amidah is about more than just individual expression. It reaches beyond the specific emotions and desires of individuals and connects with a higher reality on a number of planes. Let's take a look at Reb Chaim Volozhin's words, and I'll share my screen with you. Reb Chaim Volozhin, we've quoted him in the past. Barry and I, together with Joel, we started learning Nefesh HaChaim. We didn't get too far into it, though, before this whole COVID thing hit. Reb Chaim Volozhin, Nefesh HaChaim, writes like this. Again, I'm going to read it in Hebrew, even though I know most of you don't understand the Hebrew. And if you insist on reading the English translation, which is I offer you here, you're welcome to read it. The advantage of reading the Hebrew, though, is that I can freestyle in terms of my explanation of the text, rather than being limited to somebody else's translation. This is not my translation. Avodasenu hi rak hatfila. Our avoda is tefillah. Avoda, he translates as divine service. Okay. The only way that we can serve Hashem is through prayer. B'makom zavach u'mincha. In other words, if you think about what the Mishnah says in Perkei Avos, that the world stands on three legs: Torah, Avoda, and Gemilas Chasadim. Torah, Avoda, and Gemilas Chasadim, right? So, if Avoda is Torah, is Torah, Avoda is Avoda, Gemilas Chasadim is Gemilas Chasadim. So what is Avoda? Says Reb Chaim Volozhin, Avoda is tefillah. B'makom zevach u'mincha. It takes the place of different kinds of sacrifices. V'advarim omdim berumo shel olam. And it's one of the items, the Gemara in Bracha speaks about different items that stand berumo shel olam, at the most exalted place in the world. In other words, it's got a role. The role that tefillah plays is pivotal and is critical. B'chol teva v'teva ola l'makam gavoa me'al gavoa. Every word of prayer goes up to a very high place. V'chilol lechinam kufchav zekenim o mehem kama neviim yasduha. It's not for naught. It's not for nothing that we have 120 zekenim, 120 elders. Amongst them were prophets. They're the ones who established the Siddur. B'halo gami enosh ke'erkenu lo yipale. So he says, but people of our stature also would be able to liyase bakashas kol terkenu. We could probably put together a think tank and figure out what is it that we need. And then we can write a siddur based on our own needs, on our own wants, our own desires, our own sensitivities. Liyase, to establish bakashas kol terkenu, all of our various needs, refuah tachluenu, healing of our ailments, b'lashon limudim, we'll use language just as an educated manner. Lama tzarich l'neviim. What do you need prophets to design the Shemona Esrei and in specific, and of course the Siddur at large? Achema kivnu ba. So he says they put in particular intentions, particular kavanot. V'tiknu, and they established it. Al ofan. Sheti hakol kolol ba. Everything is included. Everything should be included in the Siddur. Kol ish Yisrael, kol echad mispal kif yavanaso. Obviously, when we daven, we each daven each according to our own understanding. So what's he saying? Just very simply, they put particular intentions into the prayer, so that everything is included in the prayer. So what does that mean? What do you think this means? What do you think this means that they established? We'll come back to the handout in a second. What do you think this means that they put all the kavanos into it? That everything that's meant to be included in it is included in it. Last week, the way that I explained it is that there's a series of doors with locks on them, and each of them, there's a series of doors. I see your question, Zach. Give me a second, okay? Get to it soon. There's a series of doors of get to the gates of heaven, and each of them is locked. And in order to unlock them, you need the right key. And those keys are different kavanot, different intentions, which are written into the actual siddur. That's how I explained it last week, and that's how I understand it as well. Now, there's different ways, different points of access, and different ways of accessing, which is maybe perhaps why we have different nuschaos. Some say that the 12 tribes each has their own nusach, their own liturgy, their own style, their own words that are unique to them, even though the basic structure is the same. So today also we have 4 or 5 different kinds of basic ways of davening, although they're 98% identical. The differences are minor. This was all done, Zach, by the group of people called the Anshe Knesset Gadol, the men of the Great Assembly, who were together with Ezra in Bavel, and then came to Eretz Yisrael. So it was after the end of the first temple. After the first temple, in between the first and second temple, and the beginning of the second temple. And who were the prophets? I don't know who the prophets were amongst them exactly. We know that the prophets who lived at those times were Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, Ezra, Nehemiah, Mordechai, and Esther were during that period of time as well. So were there other prophets as well? Possibly, because we know there were many prophets that we don't know about. They're the ones who we have recorded as being the Nevi'im of the time. Okay, so that's how I explained this concept last week. Whether or not he means more than that, it's certainly possible. I'm not going to say that Reb Chaim Volozhin is limited to the way I'm explaining it, but the idea basically is that there are a lot of kavanos that are included in the siddur. Raise your hand if you've ever seen a commentary on the siddur. You ever seen a commentary on the siddur? Of course. How many commentaries are there on the siddur? Lots of commentaries. Why are there lots of commentaries on the siddur? Because there's a lot of kavana that's included in the siddur. And in fact, my Rebbe, Rabbi Moshe Hauer, recommends that a person use a new siddur or study a new commentary on the siddur every year, because that way you'll have hischatshus, you'll have some sense of renewal in your davening, in your tefillah. The idea being that in using the Torah as a mashal, as an analogy, we know the Torah has this shivim panim lamakom, there's 70 interpretations to every verse, whatever that means. But we know there's Rashi and there's Ramban and there's Rashbam and those of you that have done a lot of text study, there's different interpretations to every verse, for every word. In the Chumash, we were aware of that. In the Siddur, we're not as well aware of that because we obviously the Siddur wasn't written by Hashem. But that being said, when the Anshe Knesset Gadol, when the men of the Great Assembly did organize a siddur, they did do so in such a way that they included everything that needed to be included in it. And therefore, the different commentaries, when they're writing on the siddur, they're going to tell you different aspects of understanding that they have in the siddur itself. Okay? Let's go back to Reb Chaim Volozhin. Klalo d'shel davar. Shemiyom shenitkana, from the day that the siddur was established, L'haya ba'olam bet beis tefilot sheyasuroshim shava lamala. He says there have not been two prayers that made the same rosham. Rosham is, in effect, a rishima like an engraving, I think. So he says that two tefillos have never had the same effect. Sheyal madrega aleph, that it should rise to the same level. Ki mishuna bezet tfilas hayom mitfilas esmol. Ki yavar. Everything is what today is different than yesterday. Hakol tali b'tevos elu, v'lekach chutzrach nevuah lezu. Therefore, prophecy was necessary for this. So, what does he mean over here exactly? Many years ago, I came across this idea, which answers a very basic question about Judaism. Let's say, oh my gosh, it took me a second. I was like, let's say I didn't daven mincha today. I did daven mincha today at shul, and we had a minyan. We had 10 people exactly. Okay, and I daven Mariv as well. Although I do have to repeat the Shema. So let's say I didn't daven mincha today. Okay, so I'll daven mincha tomorrow. Is that a kosher attitude? I mean, the words are the same, aren't they? I have a sefer called, I think it's called the Mabit. I forgot what it's called. It's written by the Mabit. My brain is not fully working yet. I have a sefer written by the Mabit. I have it at shul actually, and he basically says a very similar idea to Reb Chaim Volozhin over here, in which he says that every tefillah. So today is what day? Anyone know the date today? Don't tell me January 17th. Thursday was Aleph, Friday was Bet, Shabbos is Gimel, Sunday is Dalid.
Yes.
Tonight is already the 4th, correct? Of Shvat. Right? So that's the 4th of Shvat. If my math is correct, okay? So the 4th of Shvat. Mincha on the 4th of Shvat is different than Mincha on the 3rd of Shvat. If I miss Mincha on the 3rd of Shvat, I can't make it up. Now maybe I can make it up by davening two Marivs. Okay, there's a halachic technicality there. We've touched on that in the past. But if I missed it, let's say I didn't daven two Marivs tonight, okay? Let's say I didn't daven Shachris this morning. If I didn't daven Shachris on the 3rd of Shvat, then I cannot make it, then I cannot make that up. It's gone. That is that the potential within that tefillah exists in that moment in time. And once that moment is gone, it's gone. So it's not that I'm davening the same tefillah every single day. Every tefillah is unique. Let's go back to his words for a second here. From the time the prayers were established, there have not been two similar prayers in the world that had the identical effect above and risen to the same level. So what does that mean? It means that the effect of my tefillah on the 3rd of Shvat, on the 4th of Shvat, on the 5th of Shvat is unique to that day. And that's why it's important not to just like skip davening, if assuming a person is obligated in davening. Okay, there may be a difference between men and women. Right, now's not the time for that discussion. So when you think about it like that, it empowers a person to realize that their tefillah today has tremendous value. It's not just the same tefillah as yesterday. So what are you going to ask me? Yeah, but Rabbi, the words are the same. So what's the answer to that question? The words are the same, but the kavanah is unique. The words are the same, the kavanah is unique. Do I need to prove that to anybody? You never had the same Shemona Esrei or the same kavanah, ever. You always have slightly different. Assuming you're having kavanah, assuming you're paying attention to your davening, did you ever have two Shemona Esreis that were identical? Probably not. Very unlikely. By definition, your davening of today is not the same as your davening of yesterday. It's not. I don't think it's a difficult concept.
Why not daven 4 times a day?
We're going to talk about that. We're talking about that. You could daven as many times as you want, but not well, you're asking the Shemona Esrei specifically. You mean the Amidah? We'll talk about that shortly. I think so. Okay. Now the idea of the idea of Well, let's just finish Reb Chaim Volozhin's words, because there's a little bit more here that's important to add. He says, "V'chol hakavanot v'hasodot," all of the kavanas, all the intentions, all the secrets, shenitzgalu al hatfila ad hayom, anything that's been revealed about prayer until today, einam ketipa miyam hagadol, is really just a drop in the ocean. Neged hakavana shehisik hakatan mikufchav zakenim. These 120 elders who organized the Yishman Esrei, the Amidah, and the Siddur as a whole, their level was so high that even the amount that we've been able to generate until this day is just a drop in the bucket. Even the greatest of them only reached an understanding according to his level and the root of his soul. The truth is, and here's the part that I want to really stress for us, prayer is much above any person's understanding. Why? Because it unites the lower world with the higher one, kimuha karban, just as a sacrifice does. It's a very important point, and this is really, it brings together what we've been talking about for the past couple of weeks. Prayer unites the lower world with the higher one. We talked about that last week. And since prayer takes the place of the sacrifice, it acts like a sacrifice. Now, I know you asked me to have a class about sacrifices themselves. Not obviously, again, we're not going to focus on this part, but what's the idea? That prayer is something that's so powerful. And why is it so powerful? It's written with all of that power included in it. And that's the advantage of using the siddur, as opposed to, let's say, making up a tefillah of my own. Making up a tefillah of my own is going to be very, very limited. The next source I want to share with you is from Rabbi Kerzner, from the Art of Jewish Prayer. And once again, I'll share my screen with you to make it a little bit easier to read. Okay. Rabbi Yitzhak Kerzner and Lisa Aiken, the Art of Jewish Prayer. When the men of the Great Assembly redacted the prayers of the Amidah, they did so with prophetic knowledge and divine wisdom. This granted them the ability to see what would happen to the Jewish people throughout history until the time when the Mashiach would come. This foreknowledge allowed them to compose the prayers that Jews would need to say in all future generations in order to maintain their vital connection with God, both individually and as a nation. They were able to discern in ways that we frequently are not, what Jews in every generation would require in order to flourish emotionally, intellectually, materially, and spiritually. When we go, we'll talk, I'm not sure we'll talk about that tonight or not, but we will talk about how the Amidah itself is made up in such a way so that it does focus on our needs. Okay. I want to mention one more thing here. Just kind of obvious, and I sort of I may have mentioned this in the past, but I'll say it again. You see, my brain is a little foggy, so I forgot even then what I was going to say, but now I know. Okay, so you know how I mentioned how what's so wonderful about the Daf Yomi is that you can go anywhere in the world, and assuming you're learning what the Daf is up to, you can learn a page of Talmud everywhere in the world, the same page. If you were to go into a shul in Spain in, I don't know, the 600s, do you think you'd be able to follow the davening? Yeah, you should be able to. The accent might be strange to you. Okay? The accent might be strange. Now, I haven't done a study. I don't know what the Yemenite siddur looks like. I don't know what the Ethiopian siddur looks like. It'd be interesting to do that. All right? That would be interesting. But if you were to do a study, but in terms of the Jewish community that's been part of the Jewish community, you can go to a synagogue in Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya. You can go to one in Iran, in Iraq. More or less, you should be able to follow the siddur. Again, the script might be a little bit unfamiliar to you in the siddur itself. The accent might be a little bit unfamiliar to you because some of those things do change with time. But the actual text should be almost identical to what we have today. That's pretty powerful. If you were lahavdil, and I don't know much about this, I don't have any personal experience. If you were to go into a church on the same block, on the same day, and it was a different denomination of church, you wouldn't have no idea what's going on. Or maybe you'd have an idea, but I mean, it wouldn't. It would be a very different experience. Certainly throughout the generations. I don't know if what I'm saying is so mind-blowing or not. It could be there are other parallels to it. Okay, there's a couple of questions over here. Can one pray with kavana without actually focusing on the words? That's a fascinating question. Reb Chaim Brisker says that there's two different kinds of kavana. One kind of kavana is to be aware that you're standing in front of Hashem. And the other kind of kavana is to be aware of what you're saying. So certainly, the awareness that you're standing in front of Hashem could be kavana without actually focusing on the words. 100%. And that's a lot of what kavana is. And there's another level of kavana which is focusing on the words. Right? I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the Rambam writes, and this is where Reb Chaim speaks about it. The Rambam writes that if a person has minimally, a person needs to understand the meaning of the words of the first blessing of the Amidah. As a minimum. And if you say them without thinking about the words, then you should repeat the first bracha of the Amidah. What if the second time around you also didn't pay any attention? Then he says, don't bother because it's not worth it. Because who's to say the third time will be any better than the second time? Okay. So the whole discussion is, can you maintain your concentration on focusing and thinking about the words for the first bracha of the Amidah? But the idea that you're supposed to be aware that you're standing in front of Hashem and talking to Him, I don't think there's a cap on that. I think that's the awareness you're supposed to have. If you look in that siddur, I know I haven't gotten it for you. Some of you asked me for it and I forgot about it. There's a Ovoda Vatfila book by, I think his name is Rabbi Meir Birnbaum. See if I could find it quickly. It looked like it. Here we go. Let's see. I'm going to send you a link if I can find it here. Oh, here we go. Okay, I'm sending you a link right now to a book. Okay, it's Rabbi Meir Birnbaum. You can open it later. You can open it now and then look at it later. Rabbi Meir Birnbaum has a book called Avoda B'Tefillah. In English, it's called Pathway to Prayer. Some of you have it already, probably. And there he dissects every word of the Amidah. And if you daven with that, your Amidah will take you an hour. No joke. He has the same thing for Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. And when I use that siddur, my davening is, okay, they're all on Amazon apparently, by the way. I just have to remember what it's called. It's called Pathway to Prayer. Okay? Pathway to Prayer. Anyway, so that's a very worthwhile commentary. And I had promised that to you in the past. Okay, there's another question over here. This exalted view and purpose of the Amidah is so different from our experience of it because we are distracted, not fluent in Hebrew, struggling to understand the meaning of the language. How do we resolve this disparity? I think it's a great question. I wanna say something that I heard years ago from Rabbi David Gottlieb. Rabbi David Gottlieb gave what I thought was some wonderful advice, and that is, he said, "You're learning the siddur for the first time. You don't know what the words mean. How do you focus? How do you concentrate? How do you understand the meaning of the words?" And he had this wonderful solution. You get a Hebrew siddur, and then you write the English translation on one line of text. And then when you remember, Baruch Atah Hashem means that you, God, are the source of all blessing. Elokeinu melech haolam, our God, the King of the world. Elokeinu v'Elokei Avotenu, our God, the God of our forefathers. Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So let's say you write that all in. And for 3 weeks, you're reading that English together with the Hebrew. And then now you'll teach yourself that those Hebrew words mean those English words. And when you're finished with it, then you move on to the next line and you erase the first line. And you teach yourself what the Amidah means. And we've all been davening. Everyone here as part of this group tonight has been religious for at least 10 years. Some of us 30 years, some of us 70 years. Davening for years and years and years and years. So using the davening time as a time to educate ourselves, I think it will reduce the struggle of the understanding the meaning of the language. That's certainly one way to do it. Obviously, you can use an English siddur, a siddur that has translation. For some people, they like the transliterated. Is that what it's called? The interlinear translation. Me personally, it gives me a headache because you're reading two directions. It doesn't work for me. But for some people, they like that. Okay, thank you, Michal, for all the information. Anyways, I think that's a large part, a lot to do with it. I think people give up and they're discouraged because there's so much text. But I think if they wanted to, and they put their mind to it, they can really learn it. And this system is a very easy system. I shouldn't say easy. It's a very thorough system, and it's a very manageable system. Of course, it takes time and energy and effort. Most of you have met Rabbi Yisraeli. Rabbi Yisraeli is a very unusual Talmud Chacham, and we know him as the man that he is today. You ask him a shaila, and he'll tell you his encyclopedic knowledge about everything you ask him. It's mind-blowing. His parents are disappointed he's not a neurosurgeon. Hi, Ellie. His parents wanted him to be a neurosurgeon, which maybe he could have been. He is doing something different, obviously. When he got to yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael, and he joined. He had not learned. I don't know if he had learned in yeshiva before, but it was just in Iran. So look, it's a new language. So they put him in the lowest shir. It's called the Mechina shir. So by Nassim Friedman, I don't know if he's still teaching it or not, but he had something called the Mechina shir. So basically, everyone new to the yeshiva, without any background, they would all be dumped into that shir. Forgive me for using such language. And you would have kids who were 13 together with men who were 27. And that's the shir that you went to. And when you graduated that year, then you moved on. So Rabbi Yisraeli came to yeshiva when he was 16 or 17 years old from Iran. And they put him in that shir. By the end of the year, he had advanced to third year Beis Medrash, which was the junior year of college. Okay, that was by the end of that year. It gives you a sense of how bright he is. So he showed me his Mesilas Yesharim. He has a sefer that he had in yeshiva called Mesilas Yesharim when he first got to yeshiva. And he learned with a Chavarissa, who was able to translate for him from the Hebrew into Farsi. He didn't speak English yet. And the first few pages, you see Farsi translation on top of the Hebrew throughout the page. But as you go deeper in the sefer, it's sparser and sparser. And there's less and less translation until by you're 30, 40 pages in and you just have a word here and a word there. because he taught himself the language. Okay, that's easy when you're 16, 17, and you're brilliant, I know. And you're good with languages, of course. But we daven the same Amidah every single day. So if you take Rabbi Gottlieb's approach to writing the English on top of the Hebrew with a pencil, and you teach it to yourself over and over and over again, eventually it will sink it. And you move on to the next line. To me, it's a system that could help us understand what the words mean. Okay, I think if it's okay with you, I'm going to cut the shir short tonight. It's only a half-hour shir instead of the usual, 35 minutes. But next time we'll talk about praying 3 times a day and where that comes from. Again, we're kind of revisiting some questions and looking at them from different angles, but hopefully offering a perspective, one that is interesting and helpful. Definitely we're sharing some foundational ideas, and I thank so much everybody for coming and participating.
Thank you, Rabbi.
My pleasure.
Thank